Today, we're diving into a question that's, well, as old as humanity itself. Why is there no world peace?
I mean, have you ever really stopped to think about that? It's kind of a strange pattern, right? We're constantly talking about peace, we write songs about it, we build monuments to it, and yet somehow we always seem to end up back at war. It's like there's some invisible current just pulling us back into conflict, over and over again.
So, to untangle this, we're going to try something different. We're not going to talk about politics or borders or even good versus evil. The answer we're digging into today is, believe it or not, a lot closer to home. It's about us. It's about the wiring of the human brain. Okay, so first stop on this journey into our own minds. Is this really human and honestly often destructive need to find an enemy to blame for everything? Think about it. When we feel lost, when things are uncertain, when we're just frustrated with everything, our brains go into this kind of survival mode, and one of its favorite tools is something called projection. Basically, it's where we take all that messy internal tension and we just throw it onto an external target. We find an enemy. And here's how that path usually unfolds. First, you get this big cloud of uncertainty. Maybe it's economic, maybe it's social. Then, our brains, which absolutely hate that kind of complexity, they go looking for a simple answer. And finally, boom. All that anxiety we're feeling on the inside gets projected onto an external them. Suddenly our complex pain becomes their simple fault.
And this quote it nails it. Wars rarely begin with hatred. They begin with uncertainty. The hatred, the flags, the whole enemy persona, all of that stuff gets painted on later. The real seed of the conflict is so often just our own internal chaos looking for a place to land.
So, we've created an enemy. But an enemy is only powerful if there's an us to stand against it. And that brings us to our next point, our brain's built-in group bias. You know, we're tribal creatures at heart. Our brains absolutely love being part of a group. It's a huge part of our identity. It tells us who we are. But here's the twist. It's actually not enough for our brains to just define who we are. To really make that identity feel solid, we have this deep, deep need to define who we are not. And this us versus them instinct, well, that's where the real trouble starts brewing.
And that trouble has a name: moral distancing. The stronger our bond with our own group gets, the less empathy we tend to feel for anyone outside of it. They start to feel a little less human, a little less important. It's not because we're evil, it's a cognitive shortcut. But it's this exact shortcut that lets good people accept things in wartime that they would find horrifying in times of peace.
Okay, this brings us to our third idea, and this one might feel a little backwards at first. Let's talk about the psychological illusion of control that conflict can actually provide. Yeah, I know. We think of war as total chaos, but psychologically, it can sometimes feel like the exact opposite. When leaders, or even a whole society, feel like they're spinning out of control, the clear rules and structure of a conflict can feel way more predictable, way more manageable than the messy uncertainty of trying to find peace. This slide just lays it out so clearly. Look at the war column. It's structured, it's predictable, you have a clear good guy and bad guy. It feels like a quick fix. Now look at peace. It's uncertain, it's complex, it requires compromise and long-term thinking, all the things a stressed-out brain struggles with. But what happens when we're just completely overwhelmed by all of it? Well, that leads us to our fourth point, that scary moment when our empathy just shuts down. See, there's a very real limit to how much suffering our brains can take in. When we get exposed to too much of it, we can hit a state called empathy fatigue. It's not you becoming a bad person. It's your brain literally hitting an emergency brake as a form of self-protection. And in our world today, the triggers for this are, well, they're everywhere. We see too much suffering on the news, we're hit with a constant fire hose of information, and there are just too many conflicts going on at the same time. Our brains can't possibly hold all of it. And here's the dangerous part. When our collective empathy starts to drain away, radical, violent solutions start to seem more acceptable. Not because we've stopped caring, but because our capacity to care has been exhausted. And that creates a very dangerous void that violence is happy to fill. All right, finally, let's get to the deepest driver of all, the one we almost never want to admit to. Let's talk about the fear that's really hiding behind the fight. Deep down, a lot of conflict isn't really driven by hate. It's driven by a profound, terrifying fear. The source material calls this status anxiety. This intense fear of losing your relevance, of just not mattering anymore. And when a group or a nation feels its influence slipping, the ego can lash out, choosing to destroy rather than adapt.
This slide puts that choice in really stark terms. Peace requires cooperation, which to the ego can feel like losing. War, on the other hand, promises dominance. And for an ego that is terrified of disappearing, that promise of dominance is an incredibly powerful drug.
So when you put it all together, the psychological answer to why no world peace starts to come into focus. It's not just politics. It's our very human struggle with uncertainty. It's our deep fear of losing our identity, our control, and maybe most of all, our significance.
And that leads us to this really powerful conclusion. Peace is not just a political decision, it's psychological maturity. It's not about signing the right treaty, it's about us, as a species, growing up enough to manage these deep-seated psychological triggers. And that really leaves us with one final thought. Maybe the question we should be asking isn't, why is there no world peace? But rather, when will we finally become conscious enough to actually handle it?